The photo wasn't meant for me, but iCloud doesn't ask who it belongs to. I remember the exact second everything shifted, not with a scream or a slammed door, but with a quiet glow in a dark room, the kind of silence that feels normal until it isn't. I was sitting at the kitchen table around 11:40 p.m., the house still, the hum of the refrigerator the only thing keeping me company, my laptop open, syncing files I didn't even care about, just routine, just noise. Emily had gone to bed early, said she was exhausted from another client dinner, and I didn't question it. Not then, not yet, because when you've been married long enough, you learn to trust the patterns more than the words, and our pattern had always been simple. She worked late, I handled the rest. It was steady, predictable, safe, or at least that's what I told myself. The Photos app blinked once, then twice, a small notification sliding across the corner of my screen. New item synced. Nothing unusual. We shared storage, shared albums, shared a life. I clicked without thinking, more out of habit than curiosity. And that's when I saw it, not a message, not a confession, just an image sitting there like it had every right to exist, bright, clear, undeniable, Emily, in a place I didn't recognize, wearing a dress I had never seen, her smile different, not the one she gave me across dinner tables or quiet Sunday mornings. This one was lighter, sharper, like it belonged to someone else's life, and next to her, a man close enough that there was no space for interpretation, no room for doubt. I didn't react, not the way people think you would, no shouting, no panic, just a stillness that settled in my chest, heavy and cold. I clicked the image, zoomed in, details sharpened, the reflection in the window behind them, the timestamp in the corner, 9:12 p.m., the location tag quietly confirming what my gut already knew, not a client dinner, not even close. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under my weight, my eyes still on the screen, my mind not racing but narrowing. Focusing, because in that moment, something inside me changed, something older than anger, quieter than heartbreak. I didn't close the app. I didn't wake her up. I didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to hear answers to. Instead, I did the one thing no one expects. I kept looking. More photos loaded, one after another, each one filling in a piece of a story I was never supposed to see. Angles, lighting, different times, different days, but the same truth threaded through all of them. This wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a one-time lapse, it was a pattern. Documented in high resolution, backed up automatically, preserved without intention. I exhaled slowly, steady, controlled, the way you do when you realize the ground under you isn't stable anymore, and you have two choices: fall apart or start measuring the cracks. I chose the second. I opened the metadata panel, something most people ignore, but I don't ignore details, not in my work, not in my life. Timestamps, locations, device info, everything laid out clean, precise, unemotional. Data doesn't lie, people do. I started taking screenshots, saving copies, organizing files into folders with names that sounded more like case notes than memories, each click deliberate, each decision quiet, because right then, I wasn't acting like a husband anymore. I wasn't reacting like a man who had just been betrayed. I was doing something else entirely, something colder, something sharper. I was becoming a witness, and the difference between the two is simple: one feels, the other proves. I closed the laptop just after midnight, the house still silent. Unchanged on the surface, Emily asleep upstairs, unaware that her secret had already been documented, archived, and understood. I stood there for a moment in the dark, listening to the same refrigerator hum, the same ordinary sounds, but nothing about it felt ordinary anymore, because the truth doesn't crash into your life, it seeps in quietly, pixel by pixel, until there's no version of reality left to protect. And as I turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, one thought settled in my mind, calm and absolute. She didn't know it yet, but she had already given me everything I needed. I did not sleep that night, not even for a minute, but it was not the kind of restless tossing people imagine. It was quieter than that, heavier, like my mind had shifted into a different gear where emotion was no longer in charge. I lay there staring at the ceiling while Emily breathed evenly beside me, her rhythm calm, untouched, as if nothing in the world had changed. And that was the strange part. Everything had changed, but only I knew it, and that knowledge sat between us like a wall she could not see. I turned my head slightly and looked at her in the dark, the outline of her face familiar, the same face I had trusted for years, and I realized something that did not feel dramatic in the moment, just precise. I did not know this person anymore, not in the way that mattered. I did not confront her in the morning. I did not ask questions or search for explanations. Instead, I followed the same routine I always had: coffee at 6, black, no sugar, the machine humming while early light filtered through the blinds. She came downstairs around 6:30, dressed for the day, composed, the version of herself the world expected. She smiled at me, soft, casual, and asked if I would be home for dinner. I nodded, kept my voice steady, said yes. Nothing unusual, nothing that would suggest I had already seen behind the curtain, because that was the moment I understood something critical. Once you reveal what you know, you lose control of the situation, and I was not ready to lose anything, not yet. After she left, the house felt different, not emptier, just clearer, like the noise had been stripped away and all that remained was structure. I went back to the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the files again, the images loaded in the same order, unchanged, patient. I started organizing them properly, not just saving but categorizing, dates, times, locations. I created a timeline, one entry at a time, mapping her movements against what she had told me: work dinners, late meetings, conferences that now had very different meanings. The pattern became obvious faster than I expected. This was not random, it was structured, consistent, repeated over weeks, maybe longer, and the more I looked, the more details surfaced, small things most people would overlook: the angle of the sun in one photo matching the timestamp, the reflection of a street sign in another confirming the exact location, even the sequence of images telling a story without needing words. I was not guessing anymore, I was verifying, and verification changes everything. Around mid-morning I paused, leaned back, and looked at what I had built so far. It was no longer just suspicion or even proof in a personal sense, it was evidence. Clean, organized, undeniable, and that word mattered because evidence does not argue, it does not explain, it simply exists. I picked up my phone and made a call, not to a friend, not to family, but to someone who understood how evidence works in the real world. A lawyer I had been referred to years ago for something minor, someone methodical, discreet, the kind of person who deals in facts, not emotions. The call was brief. I did not tell the whole story, just enough to set a meeting. Late afternoon, downtown. When I hung up, I felt the first real shift in momentum, not relief, not satisfaction, just direction, and direction is more valuable than either. The rest of the day I moved through my usual responsibilities without disruption: emails, meetings, numbers on screens that normally required my full attention, but now felt secondary, not because they did not matter, but because something else had taken priority, something larger. Something that would decide what came next in my life. When evening came and Emily walked back through the front door, she looked the same as she always did, composed, confident, carrying the version of reality she believed in. She asked about my day. I answered simply, then I asked about hers, not to challenge her, but to listen, to compare, to document. She spoke easily, the details flowing without hesitation: a client dinner, a long meeting, the usual. And as she talked, I realized something else. She believed her version of the story completely. She had told it so many times it had become real to her. And that made what I had even more powerful, because when truth collides with a story someone has built for themselves, it does not just expose them, it dismantles them. I nodded, finished dinner, and later that night, as she scrolled through her phone on the couch, unaware of what I had already seen, I understood the position I was in. I was not reacting anymore. I was preparing, and preparation, done right, does not need to be loud, it just needs to be complete. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted control over the room before anything was said. The office sat on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown, quiet, understated, the kind of place where serious conversations happen without anyone raising their voice. I pushed the glass door open and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. A receptionist looked up, polite, efficient. And after confirming my name, she gestured toward a chair. Along the wall, I sat down, hands steady, mind already moving through the sequence I had built the night before, every image, every timestamp, every detail lined up in my head like pieces on a board. When the lawyer finally walked out to greet me, he did not waste time with small talk, just a firm handshake and a nod toward his office. The door closed behind us with a soft click, and for a moment, there was only silence. The kind that invites truth rather than demands it. I placed my laptop on the desk, opened it, and turned the screen toward him without saying a word. He leaned forward, eyes scanning, not reacting, just processing. Minutes passed like that, him moving through the files, clicking, zooming, checking metadata, occasionally pausing longer on certain images, not because they were more emotional, but because they carried more weight. When he finally spoke, his voice was even, controlled. "How long have you known?" he asked. I answered honestly. "Less than 24 hours. He nodded once, absorbing that, then leaned back slightly in his chair, fingers steepled. "And you have not confronted her?" I shook my head. "No." Another nod, slower this time. "Good." That single word shifted something, not relief, but confirmation that I had not made a mistake in staying quiet. He turned the laptop back toward me and tapped one of the folders. "This is strong," he said. "But strong is not the same as complete." I listened carefully, because this was where instinct ends and strategy begins. He explained it simply, not in legal jargon, but in clear steps. Evidence like this establishes a pattern, but patterns need reinforcement, corroboration, context, things that remove any room for denial or reinterpretation. "Right now," he said, "this tells a story, but in court, stories are challenged. We need to make it undeniable." That word again, undeniable. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. He outlined what came next, not emotionally, but structurally: financial records, travel logs, any shared accounts that could align with the timeline I had started, anything that tied her movements to something objective, something independent of the images themselves. "We are not trying to catch her in a lie," he said. "We are building a record that stands without her input." That distinction mattered more than anything else he said, because it meant this was no longer about confrontation, it was about construction, piece by piece, layer by layer, until there was nothing left to argue. I asked one question, the only one that mattered to me at that moment. "How do I handle her?" He did not hesitate. "You do not handle her at all," he said. "You act normal, you say nothing, you give her no reason to change her behavior." He paused, then added, "People reveal more when they believe they are unseen." I understood immediately, because that was exactly how this had started, not with a mistake, but with exposure. The meeting lasted just under an hour, but when I walked out of that office, I was no longer reacting to a situation, I was operating within a plan. The difference was subtle on the surface, but absolute underneath. The city noise outside felt distant as I walked back to my car, my mind already organizing the next steps: accounts to review, records to pull, details to verify. Everything had a place now, a direction, and as I drove home through late afternoon traffic, the sun low against the buildings, I realized something else. Emily still believed she was living inside a version of reality she controlled. But control depends on information, and she did not know what I had. She did not know what I was building, and more importantly, she did not know that every ordinary day from this point forward was not just a day, it was evidence in progress, and I intended to make sure that when the time came, there would be nothing left for her to deny. The next few days did not feel different on the outside, and that was the point. Everything looked the same morning routine, the same conversations over coffee, the same casual questions about schedules and dinners, but underneath, every interaction had a second layer now, one she could not see. I stopped listening to what Emily said at face value and started measuring it, comparing each word against the timeline I was building. Monday, she mentioned a late meeting downtown. I nodded, said nothing, and later that night, I checked the shared credit card account. A charge appeared from a restaurant I recognized, not a business district spot, but a place known for quiet tables and dim lighting. The timestamp matched her story, but the location did not. That was the difference between hearing and verifying. Tuesday, she said she had to leave early for a client presentation. I watched her move through the house, composed, efficient. The version of herself she had perfected, and once she left, I opened the laptop and added another entry to the timeline. Then I pulled phone records from our shared account. Nothing invasive, just call logs and durations. Patterns started forming faster now, repeated numbers, consistent time blocks, gaps that aligned too perfectly with the windows in the photos. It was not chaotic, it was structured, intentional, and that made it easier to map, easier to prove. I did not rush. That was the part most people get wrong. They think speed gives them control, but speed creates mistakes, and mistakes create doubt. I moved carefully, verifying each piece before placing it, building layers that supported each other. By Wednesday, I had expanded beyond the photos, financial records, location data, even small details like parking receipts and digital confirmations that most people forget exist. Everything leaves a trace if you know where to look. And I was looking everywhere that mattered. Emily did not notice any of it, or if she did not show it. She moved through each day the same way she always had, confident, relaxed, occasionally even affectionate, the kind of normal that would have reassured me a week ago, but now it only confirmed what I already understood. She believed her version of reality was intact, and that belief made her predictable. Thursday evening she suggested dinner out. Something we had not done in a while. I agreed without hesitation, not because I wanted to, but because it gave me another data point, another opportunity to observe. We sat across from each other in a small restaurant about 10 miles from the house, the kind of place where conversation carries easily. She talked about work, about colleagues, about things that sounded real enough on the surface, and I listened, not as her husband, but as someone collecting statements, noting details, identifying inconsistencies. At one point she mentioned a client she had supposedly met earlier that week. The name did not match anything in the records I had already pulled. I did not challenge her, I simply stored it, another piece waiting to be confirmed or disproven later. When the check came, I paid, the same way I always had. Routine matters, consistency matters, because any shift in behavior creates awareness, and awareness changes outcomes. That night, after we got home, she went upstairs while I stayed back in the living room. I opened my laptop again, the timeline now stretching across multiple days, each entry connected, supported, reinforced. I could see the pattern clearly, not just what she had done, but how she had done it, the rhythm, the repetition, the gaps she thought were invisible. I exported everything into a structured file, something clean, chronological, something that could be understood without explanation, because that was the goal, not just to know the truth, but to present it in a way that did not require interpretation. Around midnight, I closed the laptop and sat there in the quiet, the house unchanged, the same walls, the same furniture, the same life on the surface, but underneath, everything had shifted into alignment. This was no longer discovery, it was construction, and as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, one realization settled in with complete clarity. She was still living day to day, moment to moment, but I was building something that would define the outcome, and once it was finished, there would be no version of the story she could rewrite. By the end of that week, the timeline was no longer something I had to think about. It had become something I could read, like a map laid out in front of me, clear, structured, precise, every entry connected to the next with a level of consistency that removed any remaining doubt. What started as a handful of images had evolved into a full record, not just of where Emily had been, but of how she had constructed her days around something she believed was hidden, and the more complete it became, the less room there was for interpretation. Friday morning I sat at the same kitchen table, coffee in front of me, laptop open, reviewing everything again, not because I needed to confirm it, but because repetition reveals weaknesses, and I wanted to find any gap before someone else could. I cross-checked dates against financial logs, verified locations against public data, even confirmed timestamps down to the minute to ensure nothing could be questioned later. It was not obsessive, it was necessary, because once this moved beyond me, once it entered a legal space, it would not be about what I felt or even what I knew, it would be about what I could prove without hesitation. Emily moved through the kitchen like she always did, scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing up to make small talk. She asked if I had any plans for the weekend. I said I might catch up on some work. She nodded, casual, unaffected. Then mentioned she might have to travel again soon, another client. Another obligation, the kind of statement that used to pass without a second thought. Now it was just another entry waiting to be validated. After she left, I finalized the file, organized everything into a clean structure, chronological, labeled, supported by documentation that extended beyond the images themselves. I created backups, multiple copies stored in different locations, not because I expected anything to go wrong, but because preparation means accounting for every possibility. Then I sent a secure copy to the lawyer, along with a brief summary, no emotion, no commentary, just facts. When he responded later that afternoon, it was short, direct. "This is complete." That was the word I had been working toward. Complete meant no gaps, no assumptions, no reliance on anything that could be challenged. Complete meant ready. I sat back in my chair and let that settle for a moment, not as a victory, but as a transition, because up to that point, everything had been internal, contained within me and the work I had done, but now it was external. Now it existed in a form that could act, that could move forward without needing anything else from me except timing. That evening, Emily came home later than usual. She looked tired. Or at least she wore the version of tired she had used before. She set her bag down, kicked off her shoes, and leaned against the counter, talking about how long her day had been, how demanding her clients were. I listened, the same way I had all week, steady, neutral, allowing her to continue building the narrative she believed in, because that narrative was now part of the record too. Every statement, every inconsistency, every detail that did not align with the documented truth. We had dinner, simple, quiet. The kind of evening that would look normal to anyone on the outside, and that was exactly what I needed it to be. Normal creates contrast, and contrast makes truth undeniable when it is finally revealed. Later that night, after she went to bed, I stayed downstairs for a while longer, not working, not reviewing files, just sitting in the quiet. The process had been deliberate, controlled, and now it was finished. There was nothing left to gather, nothing left to confirm. The only thing that remained was execution. And execution is not about emotion, it is about timing. I checked my phone, a message from the lawyer confirming a meeting early next week, next steps, formal actions, everything moving forward exactly as planned. I placed the phone on the table and looked around the room. The same room where this had started, the same place where a single image had changed everything. And I realized something with complete clarity. She thought the risk was in being caught, but the real risk was in being documented, because being caught leaves room for explanation, for denial, for negotiation, but being documented leaves nothing. And as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I knew that when the moment came, there would be no argument, no confusion, no version of events she could reshape. There would only be the record, and the record would speak for itself. Monday morning arrived without ceremony, no tension in the air, no visible shift in the routine, just another day on the surface. And that was exactly how I needed it to begin. I woke up at the same time, moved through the same motions, coffee, shower, quiet steps through a house that still looked like a life we shared, but now felt more like a stage where the final act was already written. Emily came downstairs a few minutes later. Dressed for work, composed, her expression calm in the way it always was when she believed everything was under control. She asked if I would be home that evening, said she might be late again, something about a client running over schedule. I nodded, kept my tone even, told her I understood, because understanding is easy when you already know the truth. She left just after 7, the front door closing with the same soft click it always made, and for a moment, the house went still, not heavy, not emotional, just quiet. I picked up my phone and checked the message from the lawyer again. The meeting was set for 11:30, final review, document preparation, filing steps, everything moving from preparation into execution. I did not rush, there was no need, everything that needed to be done had already been completed. What remained was precision. I arrived at the office on time, same building, same quiet atmosphere, but this time there was no uncertainty in the room. No analysis phase, just confirmation. He had printed everything, organized into a structured file, tabs separating each section, photos, metadata, financial records, timelines, call logs, each piece reinforcing the others. He walked me through it page by page, not explaining what I already knew, but showing how it would be presented, how each element supported the next, how the narrative would not rely on interpretation but on alignment. "This is what matters," he said, tapping the timeline. "Consistency across independent sources." I nodded, because that was exactly what I had built, not just a collection of evidence, but a system where every part validated the others. He explained the next steps clearly. Filing would begin immediately, formal notice would follow, and from that point forward, everything would move through legal channels, controlled, structured, documented. I listened, not asking questions I already knew the answers to, just confirming the sequence. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked at me for a moment, not evaluating, just acknowledging. "Most people come in here with fragments," he said. "You brought a finished record." I did not respond, not because I disagreed, but because there was nothing to add. The work had already spoken for itself. I signed the necessary documents, each signature steady, deliberate, no hesitation, because hesitation belongs to doubt, and there was none left. When I walked out of that office, nothing about the city had changed. Traffic moved the same way, people walked past without noticing anything different, but for me, the situation had shifted completely. It was no longer something I was managing alone. It was now in motion, guided by a process that did not rely on emotion or reaction, but on structure and fact. I drove home in the early afternoon, the sunlight sharp against the windshield, and as I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it had that morning, unchanged, familiar, almost misleading in its normalcy. I stepped inside, set my keys down, and stood there for a moment, taking in the quiet, knowing that from this point forward, everything that happened would not be spontaneous. It would be the result of what had already been set in motion. Emily would come home later. She would walk through that same door, carrying the same version of reality she had been living in. But that version was about to collide with something she could not control, not because I was going to confront her, not because I was going to argue or demand answers, but because the record now existed outside of both of us. And once something becomes part of a record, it no longer depends on belief, it only depends on proof, and proof does not change based on who wants it to. The notice did not arrive with noise or warning, it came the way most decisive things do, quietly, formally, without emotion. Emily called me just after 2 in the afternoon, her voice different, not panicked, not yet, but uneven in a way I had never heard before. She said she had received something at work, something official, something that did not make sense to her. I could hear the shift in her tone. The first fracture in the version of reality she had been maintaining. I kept my voice steady, asked her what it was, even though I already knew. She hesitated for a second, then said it. Legal documents, filed, structured, detailed, my name attached to every page. She asked if I knew anything about it, and for a moment, there was silence on the line, not because I was deciding what to say, but because this was the exact moment everything moved from hidden to visible. I answered simply, yes. Another pause. Longer this time, heavier, because that single word did something no argument ever could. It confirmed that the version of me she had been interacting with was no longer the one in control of the situation. She tried to speak again, asked why, asked what this was about, her voice moving between confusion and something closer to disbelief. I did not raise my tone, did not explain. I just told her we would talk when she got home. Then I ended the call, not abruptly, just cleanly. Because clarity does not require drama. The rest of the afternoon passed without interruption. I did not pace, did not rehearse. There was nothing left to prepare. Everything that needed to be said had already been documented. Around 6:30, I heard her car pull into the driveway, the engine shutting off faster than usual, the front door opening with more force than normal, not aggressive, just rushed. She stepped inside, her movements quick, her breathing slightly uneven, the composure she usually carried not fully in place. She found me in the living room, sitting exactly where I had been when this started, the same chair, the same quiet space. But now the roles had shifted. She stood there for a second, holding the envelope in her hand, the pages slightly bent from being handled too tightly. She asked again, "What is this?" The question came out sharper this time, not because she was angry, but because she was searching for something that would make it less real. I looked at her, steady, not cold, not emotional, just clear, and said, "It is the record." She frowned, confusion pulling at her expression. I gestured toward the table where my laptop sat, already open, the screen displaying the timeline, the same structure I had built piece by piece. She stepped closer, hesitant at first, then faster. As if proximity might change what she was seeing, I did not narrate, did not guide her through it. I let the information do what it was designed to do. She started scrolling, her eyes moving quickly at first, then slowing as the pattern revealed itself. Images, timestamps, locations, financial records, everything aligned in a way that did not leave space for interpretation. I watched her process it, not reacting to her expressions, just observing the shift as it happened, confusion giving way to recognition. Recognition giving way to something heavier, something that settles in. When there is no explanation left to reach for, she opened her mouth once, then closed it, the words not forming, because the structure in front of her did not invite conversation. It presented a conclusion. After a long moment, she looked up at me, searching, not for evidence, but for something outside of it, something emotional, something that might still exist between us. But that was not what this was anymore. I spoke before she could ask anything else, my voice even, controlled, the same way it had been from the beginning. "I did not catch you, I documented you, and that difference matters, because being caught can be argued, it can be explained, it can be negotiated, but being documented leaves no space for any of that." The room went quiet after that, not tense, not explosive, just still, the kind of stillness that comes when everything that needed to be proven has already been proven, and nothing left can change it. She sat down slowly, not because she was weak, but because the weight of what she had just seen did not allow her to remain standing. The chair across from me creaked softly as she lowered herself into it, the envelope still in her hand, the edges now wrinkled from how tightly she had been holding it. Her eyes moved back to the screen, scanning again, slower this time, not searching for errors, but hoping for them. Hoping something would not line up, something would break the pattern. But nothing did. Every detail held, every piece reinforced the next, and that is the thing about a complete record. It does not collapse under pressure, it becomes clearer. She finally spoke, her voice quieter now, stripped of the sharpness from before, asking how long, not in accusation, but in disbelief. I answered without hesitation, "Long enough." She shook her head slightly, as if that answer did not give her anything to hold on to, and it did not, because it was not meant to. She tried again, this time reaching for explanation, saying things that sounded like fragments, that it was not what it looked like, that there were reasons, that things had been complicated, the kind of words people use when they are used to conversations. But this was not a conversation anymore, it was a presentation of facts, and facts do not respond to explanations. I let her speak, not interrupting, not correcting, just allowing the space to fill with everything she needed to say, because once it was said, it would stand next to the record, and the contrast would be obvious. When she finished, there was a pause, not tense, not emotional, just a gap where something used to exist between us. I reached forward and scrolled the screen to one specific section, not dramatically, just deliberately, a sequence of entries that aligned too precisely to ignore, the timestamps matching the nights she had described as something else, the locations confirming places she had never mentioned, the financial records supporting both. I did not need to say anything, I just let it sit there, visible, complete. She looked at it, then at me, then back again, and that was when the shift became final, not in volume or reaction, but in understanding, the realization that this was not something she could talk her way through, not something that could be softened or redirected. It was fixed, defined. Already moving forward without her input, she leaned back slightly, her shoulders lowering, not in defeat, but in recognition, because recognition is quieter than people expect. It does not come with noise, it comes with the absence of options. She asked one more question, "What happens now?" And that was the first time the conversation moved into the future instead of the past. I answered the same way I had approached everything else, clearly, without excess. I told her the process had already started, that the documents she received were not a warning, they were a step, and that from this point forward, everything would follow that structure, legal, formal, documented. She nodded once, slowly, not agreeing, not accepting, just acknowledging that the direction had been set. The room stayed quiet after that, the kind of quiet that does not need to be filled, because everything important has already been said. She closed the laptop gently, as if handling it differently might change what it contained. Then placed the envelope on the table, her hands resting on it for a moment before pulling away. I watched her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with clarity, because clarity is what remains when everything else has been removed. After a few minutes, she stood up, not abruptly, just with purpose, and walked toward the stairs, pausing briefly as if she might say something else, then continuing without turning back. I stayed where I was, the same chair, the same room. But the situation no longer shared between us. It had moved beyond that, into something structured, something that did not depend on either of us anymore. And as the house settled back into silence, I realized that the hardest part had never been finding the truth, it had been making it undeniable. And now that it was, there was nothing left to argue, only what comes next. The house felt different the next morning, not heavier or tense, just quieter in a way that made everything sharper, like the space itself had already accepted that something had ended even if nothing physical had changed. I woke at 6 out of habit, but without the weight of routine, moving through the morning without urgency, because there was nothing left to maintain. Emily came downstairs later, her movements controlled, deliberate. Not avoiding me but not pretending either. She poured coffee, stood at the counter, and for a moment we existed in silence, not uncertain, just finished. When she finally looked at me, her expression wasn't defensive or emotional, just aware, and that awareness changed everything, because once recognition replaces resistance, there's nothing left to argue. She asked if I'd be home later, not out of habit but practicality. I answered the same way, and that was it, simple, clean, stripped of everything that used to complicate it, and the days that followed stayed the same, quiet coordination, necessary conversations, everything focused on process instead of emotion, meetings with attorneys, paperwork, timelines, no raised voices because there was nothing left to dispute. The facts had already settled that, and with that came a kind of clarity most people never experience, a direct line from what happened to what comes next. By the time the final documents were reviewed, everything had been accounted for, assets, responsibilities, timelines, handled with the same methodical precision as the evidence, and when it ended, it didn't end dramatically, just signatures, confirmations, and a quiet understanding that it was over. I walked out of the office steady, the same way I had moved through everything else, because consistency had carried me from discovery to resolution, the outside world unchanged, the sky clear, the air steady. Nothing reflecting the shift that had already settled internally, and I drove back to the house. One last time, not holding on to what it used to be, but closing something that had already ended. Inside, nothing had changed physically, but everything meant something different. I moved through the rooms without pause, not avoiding, just understanding that once something is seen clearly, it doesn't need revisiting. I gathered what I needed, simple, necessary, and when I reached the door, I paused briefly, not to reflect, but to recognize the difference in how this ended. I wasn't the man who reacted or demanded answers. I was the man who let the truth reveal itself and built something around it that couldn't be denied. And as I stepped outside, closing the door behind me with quiet finality, one thought remained clear: she didn't lose me in a confrontation, she lost me the moment the truth became a record, because once something is documented, it stops belonging to anyone, it simply exists, and that is all that matters.